Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Stock Market Today. It's Coram and Ed Carson here with a breakdown of the action in today's session and a look at how the week unfolded. It was a pretty crazy week, Ed. We had some big earnings disappointments from mega cap tech stocks, but we ended we ended Friday on a pretty positive note. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, if you ended the week and just looked at the weekly action, say, "Wow, this was a really strong week," and there's a lot of reasons to say that. But we want to take a look. We'll get into all that. I want to take a look at also three stocks: Arista Networks, Albemarle, and Cheniere Energy. These are all three stocks sort of near buy points with earnings this coming week.
Great. Well, we will take a closer look at those three stocks, but first, let's check in on the major indexes. Since you mentioned the weekly action, why don't we start there with the Nasdaq? So here's a look at the tech-heavy index for the week, up a little over 2%, slightly delayed action here into the close, but we're coming right up to the 10-week line, Ed. So is that a cause for concern here? I mean, the Nasdaq looks different than what we're seeing on the other major indexes, which have been stronger.
Yeah, I mean, on this, it looks, hey, it's pretty strong. We closed near weekly highs. Though I will note, I think a couple days ago, it was above the 10-week line. It actually got above there. So there was some wild action, on Tuesday. It was really, we had a really strong week, Monday, Tuesday, and then we got all those mega cap techs that were not looking good. So this came down. I mean, outside of the mega caps, not so bad, but it was there. And Thursday night, things were not looking great. We were coming through below the 21-day line. We'll talk about some of the other indexes, but we're at one point, I think it was down 1.8%, the NASDAQ 100, the futures. So it was looking, oh boy. I mean, that quickly paired losses when it came around, and so everything turned out great.
But we had Amazon, even First Solar wasn't looking good. I know
Apple wasn't looking good.
Apple wasn't looking good.
But it turned around, and so sometimes you can't take, you have to look, and that's why looking at daily charts, weekly charts are important.
Right.
Ultimately, yeah, we've got the 10-week line. The 50-day line is a resistance area for the NASDAQ. I mean, we do have some of these big earnings out of the way. A lot of individual earnings coming out. Now, I mean, they might have trouble. I mean, some of them held up, but we'll see if they can hold up when they have earnings. There's reasons why these mega caps sold off. I mean, they had some really negative news, and that may filter down to other companies too.
Sure. Exactly. Well, let's take a look at the Dow, because that's really been the standout lately. What? So the Dow up about 2.6% on Friday, and just really breaking above that 200-day line. That's a lot of blue days in a row here, Ed.
If this were the NASDAQ, we'd be talking about this being a mad bull rally and boom, boom. I mean, there'd be a lot of other things going on, but wow. I mean, there was that big move just to surge from the 21-day line last week to up to the 50-day line, right there. And then we just powered up. So this last 6 days has been really impressive, not just impressive for the Dow. This is just really impressive gains.
Right.
Getting above the 200-day line, nobody else is really there. So this is an area, this is where it's hit resistance. So yeah, the NASDAQ coming up to the 50, the Dow getting just above the 200-day line. This is a key area. So, I mean,
good pause here. I mean, this is a big week, up 5.7%.
Yeah, after a couple other good weeks. This is the fourth straight week for the Dow. It's 2 weeks for the other indexes, but 4 for the Dow, which is saying something. Yeah, I could pause here, which wouldn't be the worst thing. And it's just something that we're going to have to like, are we going to pause, or are we going to hit resistance here? So it makes it a little difficult to know how aggressive you should be, because there'll be some signals saying, hey, go, but it could also be just the last gasp before we come back down.
Great point. Let's also take a look at the S&P 500, because some notable action here today with the index up 2.4% or so. A nice close. We got above the high from 2 days ago, and now we're pretty decisively above the 50-day.
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. So that is really nice to see. As Brian Shannon was pointing out, we sort of got above, we sort of came down to sort of like this area in the neck of the, right around that area from a few weeks ago. And so we're back above that little channel, little area. So yeah, really solid action. This is in some ways the best, because it's like, it feels like it's decisively above. It feels like there's some room to run. Whereas maybe like on the Dow or Nasdaq, you could start saying, well, I think there could be resistance. This one feels like it's clear, which is nice, since this is the broad-based index. Have to see, but given all the mega caps that are in this index, the fact that how well it's done is really impressive.
Right. But with that being said, we also could be due for a pause here, even though there's not a resistance level in play. If you just look at the price gains lately off of the lows from a couple weeks ago, maybe we could see a pause. Doesn't mean we're going to. We did end on a bullish note, but that is one scenario that we could see next week.
I think, yeah, and a big reason for this is like quietly, a big reason for the market rallying is probably the 10-year Treasury yield coming down significantly. Now, today it did rebound, so we got back above 4%, but on a weekly basis, I think we fell 20 basis points. First decline.
We
Yes,
finally
we're in the pink.
finally got a down week. Yeah.
Yeah, that was forever, just on and on and on. So
Yeah.
having a down week, that while there was all these earnings going on, quietly this was going down, and this was also pushing the dollar down. That one might have had an up day as well, but I think for the week it was pretty solidly down. So those are things that, because I
Yeah.
know that a lot of the big companies were saying, yeah, the dollar's just crushing our overseas earnings.
Right.
So but there's this issue. Why is it coming down? Because there was a lot of evidence over the past 6 days or so that they were going to have a Fed pivot. And there was some more news or some economic data that if you wanted to look at it, you could certainly see some reasons for that. We got the Fed meeting coming up. So we'll have to see. We'll see if Powell says there's a pivot coming or hints at it. And even if he does, he'll probably say it's data dependent. Well, you know what data is coming up right after the Fed? It's the jobs report.
Yep.
So there, and have we priced it in? How much will yields fall? Let's say we get good news from the perspective of a pivot. We have to see how it goes. If this yield rebounds next week, if we don't get a feeling, the sense of a Fed pivot, that could be a major headwind. That, and when you talk about, hey, could we hit resistance? We could very well hit resistance because of the yields of the Fed and
Yes.
jobs.
Great points there, Ed. And also, so I know this morning you were kind of saying, hey, well, I feel like we've really wasted a week, having
Yeah.
the yields come up. Do you take that back now that we did finish Friday on such a strong note?
I will take that back. It
Take
was
it
a
back.
strong move. Yeah. And it was really nice. The fact that we absorbed all those negative earnings and had a strong week. Yes. We didn't waste it, because for a while there, it looked like we did, because the Nasdaq
It
was
did.
down.
Yeah.
The Nasdaq was down for the week. The S&P was
It
hitting
was a valid
resistance.
statement at the time.
Yeah. And many of my statements seem valid temporarily. So,
Well, hey, the market's ever changing. So,
that's right.
we got to change our analysis with the changing action. Okay, let's also take a look at the dollar because, as mentioned, that's something else that we've been taking a look at. That also edged up on Friday after move up on Thursday as well. So, yeah, seeing strong gains despite this seems like a good thing.
Yeah, and it was down for the week too. So while I was,
Right.
it was that
Good
really
point.
helped quite a bit. So it was like a couple of weeks now of declines. That's not, it's like 1%, but that's a pretty sizable decline.
For the
Actually, all things
dollar.
go, yeah, and it actually came as some things like some others like, central Bank of Canada raised rates less than expected. ECB's hinted at a pivot as well. So you could have imagined a scenario where the dollar rallied quite a bit on those kind of news, but we didn't. So yeah,
Good point.
positive tailwind. See if it continues.
Okay, and let's look at a couple of sector ETFs. Here's IGV, which tracks the technology software area, up 1.9% on Friday for the week, up over 4%. So that's good to see. I mean, we've been focusing so much on, if it wasn't energy, it was medical. So now if we're starting to see software start to get back on its feet, that's a step in the right direction at least.
Yeah, this was impressive given that Microsoft, which did pair its
Yeah, and
losses
that.
and yeah, so like that's the number two component in this. It may be overstating a little bit, because cloud computing software, some of those which aren't in this, or maybe fairly small weights, but some of those really sold off this week. But yeah, I mean, given some pretty negative news, you'd say, on software, this one did pretty
Yeah,
well.
to absorb that. Okay, well, let's look at chips now. So here's SMH, a really strong day of outperformance for chips on Friday, up 3.8% for the week. SMH up about 3.5%. So the gains really coming from Friday for the most part.
but it is this feels like an area where it's like, hey, maybe the bad news is priced in. I mean, there was some good news from maybe Meta getting a splurge on certain chips, but Intel had a big day and it was not a good report. It wasn't a good guidance, and yet you look at that was one of the big winners out there.
Less
So
bad than feared?
I guess because it wasn't better than views, it really wasn't, and the forecast wasn't good. So it was, you could have easily seen this one falling quite a bit. So that
Yeah.
that helped in that regard.
Mhm. Well, let's talk about XLV as well, the healthcare sector, up 1.6% on Friday. A strong week here too, up 5%. So starting to see some interesting stocks in this area of the market as well, Ed.
Yeah, there's a lot of sectors that are doing well, that are starting to move out. There's biotechs, there's some drug makers, health insurers, drug distributors. There's a lot of stocks in this area. It was it held up relatively well. It just been, because the RS line had been doing so well, but it still had been slumping overall. I mean, some stocks were doing
Right.
quite well, but the RS line was strong. So the question is always with healthcare, can it outperform in a strong market? I mean,
Mhm.
fine, but it at least this week it was doing quite well, and a lot of stocks in this area
Mhm.
are good ones to
Yeah.
watch.
Yeah, and clearing a trend line here. All right, well, now let's take a look at some stocks, shall we? Starting with ANET. Ed, I know this is one you've been watching over the last couple of months here as it
Yeah,
tries to get back on track. Maybe took a little bit more of a detour than we thought it might, but it had a really strong week, up almost 10%. Looks like the strongest weekly volume in quite a while, maybe back in February. Looks like some strong volume as well. So that's quite a long time. Ed, what do you think about where it's trading now?
I mean, yeah, technically you could see, being like sort of clearing a trend line from there. There's another trend line you could probably draw that's a little longer that maybe it got toward. It clearly rebounded on Thursday because of Meta platforms. It
Right.
was seen as one of the main beneficiaries of, Meta's getting crushed by it, but the spending splurge is good for these suppliers. It did close near the session lows. It bounced back some more today. So in any case, you probably shouldn't be doing anything with it until earnings. I mean, all these are just names that, I mean, there's not a whole lot of growth names that are in position. This one has pretty strong fundamentals. We'll see, because just because Meta's spending a lot, we'll see if Arista's other customers are spending a lot, because that may not be the case.
Mm,
So maybe a move above Thursday's high, that would be a place, or maybe you can form a handle. Assuming it doesn't make a radical move on earnings. There's a lot of different places where you could see it forming, because there's this larger consolidation. So I definitely one to watch. This is the networking group. It's a diverse group, but it's doing
number
pretty
11.
well. Number
Yeah.
11. So the strong growth. There's other things. Definitely one to watch, but one to watch until at least Monday night.
Yes, we will be providing the IBD update on this one, I'm sure, next week. And now let's take a look at Albemarle ALB lithium stock getting right around a trend line here, depending on where you drew. I think, when it's activated, it kind of likes to sneak up a little higher.
I know. Sometimes it
Um, you
does.
know,
Yeah.
you know, Scott, where are you? Are you listening? Are your ears burning? So anyway, on the 25th, a gain of 4%. Light volume though, Ed, on the
Yeah,
move
the
up this
volume has
week.
been light on the way up, and so that is a concern. I just be clear, but on the price action, nice rebound above the 50-day line. It sort of got above this old buy point of 273. So just that some of the overhead resistance is gone, not all of it. Uh, so there it's setting up in this regard. Maybe you can form a handle in the
Mm-hmm.
next couple of days, which would
Yeah,
be
just
nice.
tighten
Um,
up. Mm-hmm.
Tighten up a little bit, and then we have earnings on Wednesday night. So we'll see how that goes. They've raised guidance a ton in the last few weeks. They do have plans to really ramp up production, so it's not just price. There's also a lot of questions on that, so that'll be important. So this could, if it moved above this week's highs, it could be a potential, not just an early entry, it might be an actual handle at that point. But we should also take a look at LTHM, because that looks a lot
Sure.
like ALB,
Yes.
only has earnings the day before. So that's one of the weird things, is that LTHM could trigger a big move up or down, and then ALB does the exact opposite. Now, they're selling
Kind
the
of like what
same
we saw this week with Enphase and First Solar, a little bit,
a little bit, a
there
little
was
bit. And there's
that potential concern at least.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there could be this or that, and so you don't
Yeah.
know. they're likely to be reporting the same kind of news, but you never know how the stocks will react. But so this will be important for ALB, and this one is also worth watching as well.
Let's take a look at LNG. We finally have pattern recognition picking up an official base pattern on the daily chart here, not the weekly, but it is showing up on the daily. Your thoughts on what we're seeing with this LNG stock?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been trading pretty tightly. It's been finding support at the 21-day line, 10-week line for quite a while now, so that's positive.
Another earnings next week.
Yeah, that's why I tried to do this kind of thing, just to watching ahead. So this will be Thursday, probably Thursday morning. I'm not 100% sure on that. Thursday morning. So I like this action. We know LNG demand is going to be strong, probably for years to come. So I think this, a move above, the buy point would be where to go. You could do it off the 10-week line, but especially the earnings are coming up. Hopefully, it can continue to base from there. It wouldn't be too far from the 50-day line if it broke out above, at this area, because I think it's not very high. So, when we talk about breakouts being a little scary, well, this one is really close to almost what you would say an early entry. So, I mean, it's there's that. And while it doesn't have the same pattern on a weekly chart, probably in an hour or two, it'll show at least a base of some sort. And since the handle is 3 cents below the top of the base, the buy point is essentially the same, no matter what you use. So strong action here. I mean, it's been a steady performer. I like how it held up, because a lot of the other energy stocks had some pretty volatile moves. But you look here, this one's had pretty tight patterns. This is only 17% deep. I think even the prior base wasn't that deep. The other energy stocks were selling off. So that's a little comforting, because it's not quite as directly related to the swings in crude oil or natural gas. It's more the spread. It's more, some other factors, but it's been able to trade tighter.
All right, well, we'll see what comes next week when we get earnings from these three stocks and many others. So speaking of, Ed, it seemed like it was a relatively pivotal week for the market rally, and impressive, as you said, to see the market shake off and really show that resiliency in the face of all of the negative earnings reports from these big stocks. So when it comes to how we should be preparing for the week ahead, what should we be focused on?
Well, you should be, you can be adding exposure here, though you might also want to be cautious with, as you're saying, there's reasons to think just technically maybe we could have a pause here. There's the Fed meeting, other things. So you may not want to get too aggressive. I'm not saying pulling back, but not getting too aggressive. Also note that it was interesting. Brian Shannon of Alpha Trends said today, was talking about, at least early on, maybe he's changed his mind over the day, but he's talking about that the buying opportunities were pretty skinny out there, as he said. And so
just to jump in, it's just because this week was strong doesn't mean it was easy. I mean, underneath the surface, we like shockwave, we really saw things kind of whipping around, so among our watch list stocks. But anyway, you were saying, Ed.
Yeah, and there's also a lot of the stocks that are doing well are somewhat defensive or not growth. I mean, there's energy names, but then you have like some restaurants, you have discounters, you have auto parts retailers. There's also medicals. I mean, some of these have some solid growth behind them, but they're not necessarily the traditional growth names. So definitely have a wide net. Don't get focused on, I want the super high growth stocks. Because a lot of them, honestly, those are not leading yet. Look for them, put them on watch lists, but have a wide net. And I think you still want to be cautious in this environment. While if things are working for you, well, then you can keep on adding. If things aren't working for you, well, take a note and scale back. So if this market really has legs, you'll have opportunities. So don't be like stubborn. I think the market feasts on stubborn investors, because stubborn investors, they get squashed pretty quick.
Yeah, Vertex, that was the other one that I was thinking about that was really tricky this week.
Oh, that one was a tricky one,
yeah. It's hasn't been easy, even though we are seeing a step in the right direction. But we'll continue to keep our watch list fresh. And thanks for another couple of great ideas for us to think about. over the weekend as we do our screening. All right. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in. Coming up at 5 p.m. Eastern, I will be chatting with Anne-Marie Bain of thetradingbook.com to get her thoughts on how to make tough trading decisions. I'm sure she had to make a number of them this week as an active trader who's really focused on options. So I'm excited to pick her brain and get her thoughts. It's live on my YouTube channel at 5 p.m. Eastern. So I will see everyone there. Hope you have a great weekend, everyone. And we will see you back on IBD Live for Halloween on Monday.